A wheelchair, a 40-foot drop. A woman screaming into a storm that swallowed every sound she made. Ethan Cole saw it from the far end of the pier, the chair moving too fast, the woman's arms fighting something she couldn't stop, the black edge of the world rushing up to meet her. He didn't think. Thinking gets people killed. He ran. If this is the kind of story that reminds you why ordinary people do extraordinary things, hit like, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this reaches, and follow along. You don't want to miss what happens next. The storm had been building since mid-afternoon, the kind that rolled in off the coast without much warning and turned the whole city gray inside of an hour. By 9 o'clock, the rain was coming sideways, and the old municipal pier on the south end of Harwick Bay was exactly the kind of place no sane person had any business being. Ethan Cole was there anyway. He came here sometimes when the apartment got too small, which happened more often than he liked to admit. 460 square feet with one bedroom, a bathroom where the hot water ran out in 6 minutes on a good day, and a daughter who'd been coughing more than usual this week. When the walls started pressing in and the numbers on his phone's banking app stopped making sense, he'd drive to the pier and just stand in whatever weather was happening and breathe. It wasn't a healthy habit. He knew that. His former therapist, the one the VA had assigned him for 8 sessions before his coverage ran out, had called it avoidance behavior dressed up as resilience. She wasn't wrong, but she also didn't have a 7-year-old with a congenital heart defect and a stack of medical bills that read like a ransom note. He was leaning against one of the old pier posts, collar up, rain soaking through the back of his jacket because the collar didn't do much, when he heard the sound. Not a scream exactly, more like a voice trying to become a scream and not quite getting there. Something raw and desperate, swallowed almost immediately by a gust that bent the pier light sideways. He turned. The wheelchair was 50 yards down the pier, moving fast. Too fast. The woman in it had both hands on the wheels, but she wasn't guiding it. She was fighting it, and she was losing. Something was wrong with the chair. Even from that distance, Ethan could see it wasn't responding the way it should. It was tracking straight for the railing at the far end, and the railing was old iron that hadn't been inspected in probably 15 years, and beyond it was 40 feet of nothing, and then the black water of Harwick Bay. Ethan was already moving before his brain had finished processing the picture. He wasn't in shape the way he used to be. 4 years out of the Navy, and the body had accumulated a different kind of wear, not soft exactly, but tired, with a left knee that ached in cold weather and a shoulder that clicked when he reached too far overhead. He'd lost the precision, but the instinct was still there, buried under everything else, and it surfaced now without asking permission. He ran. The pier was slick with rain, and he nearly went down twice in the first 20 yards, one hand slapping the railing to keep his balance. The woman was screaming properly now, the sound breaking loose when the wind shifted for a moment, and it was the most purely terrified sound he'd heard since places he didn't think about anymore. He hit the back of the wheelchair at a dead sprint and dug his heels in, and the momentum still carried them both forward 3 more feet, the iron railing slamming into his thighs like a baseball bat. He took it, planted himself, and pulled. The chair rocked. For 1 second that stretched out long and stupid, Ethan thought the railing was going to give, that they were both going over, that this was going to be the last idiotic decision of his fairly idiotic life. The iron groaned. His boots scrabbled against wet wood. Then the railing held. The chair stopped. Ethan stood there with his hands locked on the push handles, breathing hard, rain pouring off the back of his neck, and looked at the woman in the chair. She was looking back at him with eyes that were enormous and dark, and doing that thing eyes do when a person has just stared directly at their own death and can't quite believe they're still here. "Are you—" he started. The chair moved. He hadn't let go of it, but it moved anyway, a slow mechanical lurch toward the railing, and Ethan realized in the same instant that the brake was gone. Not locked. Gone, as if something that was supposed to be there had simply been removed, and the whole frame was canted slightly to the right in a way that wasn't structural damage. It was deliberate. It was built to pull in that direction, and underneath the rain he could smell something metallic and mechanical that he recognized from very different contexts. This wasn't an accident. This was a machine that had been modified to do exactly what it was doing. "Hold on," he said, and he wasn't talking about the railing. The chain was wound through the spokes of the rear wheels, threaded through the brake housing, and whoever had done it with enough knowledge to make it both effective and invisible until the chair was already moving. Ethan got his hand around the near wheel and stopped it manually, the metal cutting into his palm, rain making everything slippery and terrible. "There's something," the woman said. Her voice was steadier than he expected, shaking but present. "The wheel. There's something in the wheel." "I know. I see it." He was already working on it, fingers slipping, knuckles slamming the spoke. "I'm going to need you to hold this handlebar and don't let it turn. Can you do that?" "Yes." She did it. She grabbed the handle and held it with both hands while he worked the chain loose. 2 minutes of ugly, freezing work in the dark and the rain, and when it finally came free, he dropped it on the pier planks, and it made a sound like a small sentence. He straightened up. His hands were bleeding a little where the metal had caught him. The woman was watching him. She'd pulled her hair out of her face at some point, tucked it back with a hand that he noticed was still trembling badly. Late 20s, maybe 30. Well-dressed, or she had been. The coat was soaked through now. She was trying to look composed, and she was mostly managing it, which told him something about her. "Thank you," she said. "Yeah." He looked down the pier, then back toward the lot where his truck was parked. "We should get off this pier. Whoever set that up might still be—" "I know they're still here." She said it quietly, like it was a fact she'd already organized inside herself and wasn't happy about. "There was a man near the entrance to the pier when I came out. He watched me go by and didn't say anything, and I thought—" She stopped. "I should have turned around. How'd you end up out here at 9 o'clock in a storm?" "I received a message," her jaw tightened, "from someone I believed I could trust. I'm reconsidering that belief." Ethan looked at her for a moment. The rain had eased slightly, from violent to merely miserable, and in the sickly orange light from the one functioning pier lamp he could see her more clearly. She was controlling her fear the way people control it when they've had practice, which meant this wasn't the first time someone had put her in a dangerous situation. "Can you move the chair yourself?" he asked. "Yes, the motors weren't the problem. Okay? Stay close and stay behind me and tell me if you see anything that doesn't look right." "Most things right now don't look right." "Fair enough." He got her off the pier without incident, which he was grateful for and suspicious of in equal measure. The lot was empty except for his truck and a gray sedan parked near the entrance with its lights off, which hadn't been there when he arrived. He clocked it and kept his body between it and her, and they reached the truck, and he got the chair loaded into the bed with the ease of someone who'd handled awkward equipment in bad conditions enough times that it was muscle memory. When she was in the passenger seat, he sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting the engine. "You need to call the police," he said. Something shifted in her expression. "No." "Someone just tried to kill you." "I'm aware of that." "So call, I can't." She said it with a flatness that closed the door on the argument. "The person who set this up has relationships with people in this city's law enforcement structure. If I call the police tonight, I'm going to end up in more danger, not less. I need—" She paused, and he could see her working something over in her head, calculating. "I need somewhere safe for tonight. Just tonight. And then I can make some calls in the morning to people I actually trust." Ethan stared out the windshield at the gray sedan across the lot. It still hadn't moved. He thought about Lily, sleeping right now in their apartment with the fan on because she liked the white noise, one arm around the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. He thought about the sensible thing, the smart thing, the thing that protected the only person in his life who actually depended on him. "You know," he said, "I'm the wrong person to ask for help." "You're the only person I've got." He started the truck. The apartment embarrassed him. He knew it was going to the moment he opened the door, and he still hadn't figured out how to care about that less. He'd made the place livable in the ways that mattered. It was clean, the leak under the kitchen sink wasn't leaking anymore. Lily's corner had her drawings on the wall and her books organized by the color system she'd invented herself. But there was no hiding what it was. A thin-walled, second-hand furnished box with an eviction notice on the inside of the front door that he'd turned around so Lily couldn't read it. He'd forgotten he'd turned it around. The back was blank, so she'd never asked. He'd stopped seeing it. Victoria Hale saw it immediately. She didn't say anything. She was good at not saying anything. Had that particular stillness of someone who'd learned to take in a room without reacting to it. He watched her eyes move across the notice and keep moving across the stack of bills on the counter, the single pull-out couch with the pillow already dented from when he slept there to give Lily the bedroom, the refrigerator covered in drawings of horses, and what appeared to be several portraits of their neighbor's dog. "My daughters," he said, nodding at the drawings, which was unnecessary, and he knew it. "How old?" "7." She nodded. She wheeled herself to the kitchen table, and he saw her glance at the bills without meaning to, and then look away, the way people look away from accidents. He put on coffee because it was something to do with his hands. The rain was still going outside, softer now, and the apartment was quiet except for the particular breathing sounds of a sleeping kid down the hall. "You should know," he said, his back to her, "that I'm not equipped for whatever this is. I'm not in protective services anymore. I work at a gas station 3 days a week and a moving company on weekends." "I know what you are," she said. He turned around. "What does that mean?" "It means I can read a person," she said. "What you did on that pier, that wasn't luck, and it wasn't civilian instinct. You've had training." He looked at her for a moment. "Used to." "Navy?" He poured coffee into the one mug that wasn't chipped, set it in front of her. "Used to," he said again. She wrapped both hands around the mug, and he saw, now that they were in actual light, that her hands were still not entirely steady. The composure was real, but it was costing her something to maintain it. "Okay," she said, "here's what I can tell you. My name is Victoria Hale. I'm the CEO of Hale Dynamics." She said it evenly, the way you say something that normally carries weight, but you've decided to strip the weight off for the sake of efficiency. "The man who tried to have me killed tonight is my stepbrother, Marcus. He's tried before. 8 months ago, there was a car accident that the police ruled as mechanical failure. I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. She paused. "That's when I started using the chair." Ethan had sat down across from her without deciding to. He was looking at her. She was looking back at him in a way that wasn't a plea and wasn't a performance. It was just direct and exhausted and honest in the particular way that exhaustion makes people honest. "He wants control of the company," she said. "I'm the only thing standing between him and it, while I'm alive. And the evidence you mentioned, financial records, internal communications, third-party contracts he routed illegally, enough to put him in a federal facility for years. It exists. I need to be alive to use it." Ethan turned his coffee cup in his hands. The clock on the microwave said 11:47. He had a 6 a.m. shift in 9 hours. "Hale Dynamics," he said slowly. "Yes. The same Hale Dynamics that bought out Ridgeway Industrial Park 2 years ago and converted it." A small shift in her face. Something that wasn't quite guilt, but was adjacent to it. "Yes? There was an auto shop on that property. Becker's. About 40 workers." She was very still. "My boss was Gene Becker. He was 62 years old. He'd built that shop from scratch. He had 9 people who'd worked for him for more than a decade." Ethan's voice stayed level. He was good at keeping his voice level. "When the buyout happened, they were given 4 weeks' notice and 1 month severance. Gene tried to fight it. There were lawyers." He set the cup down. "There wasn't anything at the end of the lawyers." Victoria held his gaze. She didn't look away, which he half expected her to do, and she didn't rush to explain herself, which he also half expected. "I know," she said. "You know." "The Ridgeway acquisition was Marcus's project. He managed it through a subsidiary I didn't have direct oversight of. I found out about the conditions of the buyout afterward." She paused. "That isn't an excuse. I should have known. I should have been paying closer attention to what was happening inside my own company. I wasn't, and people were hurt by it, and I—" She stopped. Started again. "I know that doesn't undo anything." Ethan looked at her for a long time. Outside, the rain had dropped to a faint percussion against the window. Down the hall, Lily made a small sound in her sleep. Nothing alarming, just the unconscious adjustments of a child shifting positions, and both of them went still for a moment, listening, until the silence resettled. "The couch pulls out," Ethan said finally. "You can have the bedroom. It's small." "I can take the couch." "You can't get the chair through the couch. It's not set up right. Take the bedroom." He said it the way he said most things, without ceremony, with a finality that wasn't harsh but made it clear the topic was done. She looked at him with something in her expression that he didn't have a word for and didn't try to find one. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He picked up his coffee cup. "Honestly, I don't know yet," he said. "Ask me in the morning." He pulled out the couch. He lay on top of the blanket with his boots still on and his eyes on the ceiling, listening to the rain and the breathing of the walls, and thought about a gray sedan in an empty lot, and 40 feet of cold water, and a woman with steady hands that shook. Sleep didn't come for a long time. When it finally did, it didn't stay. He woke up at 5:15 without an alarm, the way he always did, some internal clock that the Navy had installed and never bothered to uninstall. The apartment was still dark. The rain had stopped at some point in the night and left behind that particular quiet that follows a storm. Not peaceful exactly, more like the world catching its breath. Ethan lay on the pull-out couch for a moment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that he kept meaning to patch and kept not getting around to, and ran through what he knew. A woman was asleep in his daughter's bedroom. Someone had tried to kill her. The person who'd tried to kill her had resources and connections and enough patience to sabotage a wheelchair rather than do something direct, which meant they were careful and they were willing to wait, which in his experience made them more dangerous than people who acted on impulse. The woman herself was the CEO of a company that had helped put him out of a job and done the same to 40 other people he'd known, and he'd brought her home anyway. He sat up, ran a hand over his face, and went to make coffee. He was on his second cup, sitting at the kitchen table with the stack of bills pulled in front of him because they didn't get less real by ignoring them, when he heard the sound of the chair moving down the hall. It was quiet. She was trying to be quiet. But the old floors had a specific vocabulary, and the chair had a small squeak in the right rear wheel that he'd noticed the night before. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway. She'd changed into something. She must have had a bag with her that he hadn't registered. And her hair was down, still slightly damp from the rain or from washing her face, and without the coat and the shock layer of the night before, she looked smaller than she had on the pier, not fragile, just human-scaled. She looked at him, then at the bills on the table. He didn't move to cover them. "Coffee's on the counter," he said. "Thank you." She got herself a cup. He noticed she didn't ask where anything was, just looked until she found it. Independent in the specific way of someone who'd learned early that asking for help came with costs. She brought it to the table and sat across from him the way she had the night before, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "How's your hand?" she asked. He looked at the palm of his left hand where the chain had caught him. He'd forgotten about it. There was a dark bruise across the base of his fingers and a cut that had closed on its own overnight, not deep enough to be serious. "Fine," he said. She looked at it with an expression that said she was forming an opinion about his definition of fine, but had decided not to share it. "I need to make some calls this morning," she said. "I have a lawyer I trust, and one person at the company, my assistant, Renata. She's been with me since before Marcus joined the board. She knows where some of the documents are stored. You can use my phone. I have mine, She stopped, set her coffee cup down. "I want to be transparent with you about something before I use it. Using my phone creates a location record. If Marcus has someone monitoring my signal, and he might, it could bring attention to this address." Ethan looked at her steadily. "Were you going to tell me that before or after you made the calls?" "Before. That's why I'm telling you now." He considered that. It was a small thing, the kind of thing that was easy to overlook in favor of doing what you needed to do, but she'd chosen to say it anyway. He filed that away. "Use the phone once, keep it brief, then turn it off and pull the SIM," he said. "Do you know how to do that?" "I can figure it out. The SIM tray needs a pin or a paperclip. There's one in the junk drawer." He nodded toward it. "After that, we figure out your next step. But I've got a problem first." "What problem?" "My daughter wakes up in about 40 minutes. She's 7 and she's sharp, and if she comes out here and finds a stranger in the apartment, I need to have a story ready that isn't going to scare her." Something moved across Victoria's face that he couldn't read entirely. "What do you usually tell her?" "She doesn't usually come home to strangers," he said. It came out more pointed than he intended. "You're the first." "Of course." She held her coffee cup with both hands. "What would work?" He thought about it. Lily was 7, but she processed things the way older kids did. She'd had enough disruption in her short life that she'd developed an early and accurate instinct for when adults were managing her. She wouldn't be fooled by something too smooth. "The truth is usually better," he said. "I'll tell her you're someone who needed help and you're staying for a bit. She'll accept that. She's used to—" He paused. "She's used to things being complicated." Victoria didn't push on that. She just nodded. They were still sitting there, in the particular silence of two people who don't know each other but have already seen each other in extremity, when Lily's door opened. She came down the hall in her pajamas, the ones with the small stars on them that she'd picked out herself at a discount store 3 months ago, with her hair in the loose braid she always slept in and her rabbit under one arm, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Victoria with the direct, unself-conscious appraisal of a child who hasn't yet learned that staring is rude. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Victoria said back. "Are you Dad's friend?" Ethan opened his mouth. Victoria got there first. "I'm someone your dad helped last night," she said. "He let me stay because the weather was bad. My name's Victoria." Lily considered this. She looked at her father. He gave her the small nod that meant it's okay, the one they'd worked out together over years of situations where she needed to read him quickly. "Okay," Lily said. Then, to Victoria, "Do you want some cereal? We have the kind with the little squares and also oatmeal, but the oatmeal's better if you put brown sugar in it." "The little squares sound good," Victoria said. Ethan watched his daughter get out 2 bowls, one for Victoria, one for herself, not one for him because she knew he didn't eat cereal, and carry them to the table with the extreme care of someone transporting something precious. And he felt the particular ache that fatherhood produced in him sometimes, this mixture of fierce love and low-level terror that never fully went away. He got up to call his supervisor at the gas station. He was going to have to miss the shift. He'd done it twice before in the past year, and both times it had been Lily, once for a fever, once for a cardiology appointment, and his supervisor was a tired man named Patrick who ran on vending machine coffee and a thin patience for complications. And Ethan knew the conversation wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't. But when he came back to the kitchen, Lily was explaining her color-coded book system to Victoria with the focused energy of someone sharing important information, and Victoria was listening, actually listening, not performing it, and asking questions that proved she'd followed what had been said. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment and watched and didn't say anything. "Oh." The calls Victoria made were short and careful, and she pulled the SIM card after the second one, sitting at the kitchen table with Ethan's paperclip and a precision that suggested she'd thought about operational security before, or had simply adapted to it quickly. When she was done, she sat with her hands flat on the table and her eyes on the middle distance, working something through. "Renata can get to the documents," she said. "The ones I need. There are financial transfers. Marcus moved money through 4 shell companies over 18 months. The paper trail exists, but it's buried, and he knows it's buried. He's been trying to find where I stored the access codes for the encrypted files." "Does he know you have them?" "He knows I found something. He doesn't know how much." She turned her coffee cup. "The car accident 8 months ago wasn't random. He was trying to stop me from finishing the audit. When that didn't work..." She glanced down at the chair, briefly, and then away. "When that didn't work and I survived, he went quiet for a while. I thought maybe he decided the risk was too high. I started to think I'd misread it." She paused. "I hadn't. Why not go public with what you have now? Give it to a journalist, a federal investigator. Because what I have right now is enough to open an investigation, not enough to close one. Marcus has lawyers who are very good at slowing things down. And while things are being slowed down, I'm in a position where he has every reason to finish what he started." She met Ethan's eyes. "I need the encrypted files. All of them. Once I have those, I can go to the federal level, and I can do it in a way that makes moving against me more conspicuous than it's worth." "Where are the files?" "On a server I control, but the access codes are written down and stored somewhere Marcus doesn't know about. Renata knows where. She can get them to me, but it's going to take a day, maybe 2. And in the meantime, Marcus knows the pier didn't work. He's going to be recalibrating." Ethan sat with that for a moment. Outside, the morning had gone gray-bright, the particular flat light of an overcast day after rain, and the street sounds were starting up. A garbage truck 2 blocks over, the upstairs neighbor's floor creaking as he did whatever he did up there at 6 in the morning. "You can stay here," Ethan said. "For now." She looked at him with an expression that had something careful in it. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." "You understand what you're getting involved in." "I understand someone tried to kill you, and the help you have available is a lawyer who needs a day and an assistant who needs 2. He leaned back in his chair. "So, you can stay here. It's not much, but it's not connected to you, and right now that's more useful than comfortable." She was quiet for a moment, then, "I'll pay you. For the time, for the risk." "Don't," he said. Not harsh, just clear. She looked at him. "Don't do that," he said. "Not yet. Maybe not at all. Let's just see what the next 2 days look like." Lily had school, which meant the morning had the particular controlled chaos of getting a 7-year-old ready. The lost shoe that was under the couch, the permission slip that needed signing, the negotiation over whether Tuesday's leftover pasta was an acceptable addition to a lunch bag, and Victoria stayed out of the way of it, which Ethan was quietly grateful for. She sat in the kitchen with her phone's dead sim on the table in front of her and watched the chaos with an expression that was hard to categorize. Not pity, something more like recognition, maybe, of a life she'd been looking at from the outside for a long time. When Ethan came back from dropping Lily at school, the kitchen was cleaner than he'd left it. Victoria had washed the breakfast dishes and put them away, and she'd found the sponge and wiped down the counter, and she'd made fresh coffee. He stood in the doorway and looked at it and didn't comment, because commenting would make it weird, and it wasn't weird. It was just a person doing the useful thing with the time they had. "Her heart," Victoria said when he sat down. It wasn't quite a question. He looked at her. "How do you—" "The paper's on the counter." She said it without apology. "I wasn't prying, but medical billing statements have a particular look. And last night when you mentioned your daughter, you said she'd been coughing." He thought about being annoyed and decided it wasn't worth the energy. "Congenital defect," he said. "She's had it since birth. It's manageable for now, but there's a procedure, a specific surgical correction, that she's going to need in the next 12 to 18 months, or the window closes and the options get a lot worse." "What does the procedure cost?" He looked at her steadily. "A lot more than I have." "How much more?" "Victoria, I'm asking because I want to understand the situation, not because I'm going to—" $80,000, he said. "After insurance, which I have through the moving company, but it's got a cap on surgical procedures that tops out well below what this costs." He said it flatly, the way you say a number you've said so many times, it's stopped feeling real. "I've got about 9,000 saved. I've been picking up extra shifts for 8 months. I've applied for 2 grants and been waitlisted on both." Victoria was very still across the table. "So that's the situation," he said, "in case you were wondering why a Navy SEAL is working a gas station." "You're not a Navy SEAL anymore." "No, I'm not." She looked down at her coffee. "What happened?" "After the Navy." He considered not answering. Then he decided it was a fair question given that she'd told him things that could put her in serious legal jeopardy. "I left," he said. It's not a simple answer. I made a decision on a mission that my commanding officer thought was the wrong decision. Tactically, he wasn't wrong. But I was the one on the ground and I made the call I made, and 2 people are alive today who wouldn't be, and 2 people died who might not have. He paused. "I don't talk about the specifics. You don't have to. When I got out, I had a wife, and then I didn't, and then I had Lily, and that was the job. Finding work that kept the lights on and let me be home when she needed me, and also pay for the cardiologist and the prescriptions and everything else." He finished his coffee. "The auto shop was the best version of that for about 2 years. Then the auto shop went away." There it was again. The thing between them that wasn't quite an accusation, just a fact with weight. "The Ridgeway acquisition," Victoria said. "Yeah." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had something in it that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite apology, something harder and more honest than either. I built Hail Dynamics into what it is by being very good at seeing the numbers and very bad at seeing what the numbers represented. Revenue, acquisition targets, market position. I understood those. I could read a balance sheet in 10 minutes and tell you exactly where the inefficiencies were. She paused. What I wasn't doing, for a long time, was understanding that the inefficiencies were people, that the restructuring costs were people's livelihoods. I told myself that the overall growth was worth it, that the people affected would find other things. She stopped. I believed it, which is the worst part. I wasn't cynical about it. I wasn't looking. Ethan listened to this without expression. The accident changed things, she said. Being in the hospital for 6 weeks, being in the chair, it did something to the way I see from the ground up. I'm not saying that like it's a redemption story. I'm saying it made me look at things I'd been not looking at for years, and a lot of what I saw was not good. Including your stepbrother. Including Marcus. Including the things I let happen inside my own company while I was focused on the big picture. She turned her cup again. I was in the middle of trying to fix some of it when he tried to kill me. He doesn't want me to fix it. The corruption benefits him directly. He's been using the company structure to move money for 3 years, and I didn't see it because I trusted him more than I should have. Why? What made him trustworthy? He wasn't always like this. She said it with the weariness of someone who'd turned a fact over many times and still couldn't make it make sense. When he came into the family, his mother married my father when we were teenagers. He was just a quiet, ambitious kid. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies. When I took over the company after my father's death, I brought Marcus onto the board because he was family and he was competent, and I thought... She stopped. I thought I was doing the right thing by him. And instead he spent 3 years deciding he deserved the whole thing. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car alarm went off briefly and then stopped. People who think they deserve something they haven't earned are the most dangerous kind, he said. I've seen it. The ones who want what they want because they've convinced themselves it's owed to them. They don't have any ceiling. No, she said. They don't. By afternoon, Ethan had worked out a rough shape of the next 48 hours in his head, the way he used to work out the structure of an operation. Not rigid, because rigid plans broke, but a framework with enough flexibility to adjust when something changed, and something always changed. Victoria needed the documents. The documents needed 2 days. In those 2 days, Marcus was going to be looking for her, which meant looking for anything anomalous. Her usual patterns, her known contacts, anywhere she might go to ground. The apartment on Callaway Street, 1 block from an elementary school, currently occupied by a single father and his kid, was not going to be on that list. That was the advantage. The disadvantage was that Ethan had no way to know what Marcus's network actually looked like, how many people he had access to, what kind of surveillance capability he was working with. Victoria knew more about that than he did, and in the early afternoon they sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and she told him everything she knew about her stepbrother's operations, while he listened and made sparse notes. Marcus had 3 people Ethan would call fixers, people who did things that needed to stay at arm's length from the executive. One of them, a man named Slade, who Victoria knew only by his last name, was the one who'd been coordinating the physical attempts. The pier was his work. The car accident had probably been his work too. What does he look like? Ethan asked. I've only seen him twice, tall, thick through the shoulders, late 40s. He has a burn scar on his left forearm. She paused. He was military, I think, or he presents that way. What way is that? The way you do, actually, quiet until he's not, aware of the room. Ethan noted that and moved on. Marcus himself had a lawyer, a man named Desmond Carr, who worked out of a downtown firm that also had 3 retired city officials as consultants, which was why Victoria didn't trust the local police in this situation. She'd given him the name without him asking, which meant she understood exactly what he was trying to build a picture of. By the time Lily came home from school, they had 4 pages of notes and a slightly clearer sense of the shape of what they were dealing with. It wasn't reassuring, but formless fear was worse than a fear that had edges. Lily burst through the door with the focused energy of a child who'd been sitting still for 7 hours and was done with it, and she dumped her backpack on the floor, which she knew she wasn't supposed to do, and then remembered Victoria and looked toward the kitchen with the expression of a kid recalibrating. "Is she still here?" Lily said in a loud whisper directed at her father that Victoria could absolutely hear. "Inside voice," Ethan said. And yeah. Lily picked up her backpack and brought it to her room the way she was supposed to, and then came back and sat at the kitchen table across from Victoria as if this was a thing that happened normally. "Did you stay here all day?" "I did," Victoria said. "Did my dad make you lunch?" "He did." Lily nodded with the expression of someone verifying information. "He only makes two things for lunch, grilled cheese or the egg thing." It was the egg thing. The scrambled eggs with the cheese melted in? Yes. "That's the good one," Lily said with the authority of someone who'd done extensive field research. Ethan, standing in the kitchen doorway, felt something in his chest do a complicated thing. His daughter was sitting across from the CEO of a billion-dollar company talking about scrambled eggs, and neither of them seemed to think it was strange. Lily, because she was 7 and 7-year-olds, hadn't yet learned to perform their reactions. Victoria, because he didn't know why. Because she was tired, maybe, and tired people stop performing, or because she was actually present in a way that money and power didn't usually coexist with, at least in his experience. He went to the kitchen to figure out dinner. That evening, after Lily was in bed, they sat in the living room with the lamp on and the television off. The notes were on the table. The reality of the next 2 days sat between them like a third presence. "Tell me about the files," Ethan said. "Walk me through exactly what they contain." She did. It took 40 minutes, and she was precise about it. Not lawyerly, not hedging, just factual and clear. The financial transfers, the amounts, the dates, the shell company structures. The communications where Marcus had been explicit enough to be damning. The third-party contracts that routed company money through external vendors he owned under different names. When she was done, Ethan was quiet for a moment. "This is enough," he said. "If it's what you say it is, this is enough to put him away." "I know." "He knows that too. That's why the chair." "Yes. And when Renata gets the access codes to you, I can decrypt the files from anywhere. I just need the codes and a secure connection." "Renata, you trust her completely?" Victoria considered the question seriously, which he respected. "She's worked for me for 6 years. She's turned down 3 better offers that I know about because she wanted to stay. She came to see me every week in the hospital." She paused. "I trust her more than I trust anyone else in my professional life, which isn't saying much because most of those people I don't trust at all. But for Renata, yes, completely." Ethan nodded. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "Go ahead." "Last night on the pier, you were there. You said sometimes when the walls get small, you were just there in that weather, alone. And then this happened." She looked at him. "Does it feel like— I don't know how to ask this without it sounding like something it's not. Like what? Does it feel like something that was supposed to happen? Like you were supposed to be there?" He thought about that honestly. "No," he said. "It feels like chance. I was there because I needed air and I couldn't afford the gas to go anywhere else. And you were there because someone sent you a message that was a setup. That's not fate. That's just what night it was." She looked at him steadily. "And yet here we are." "Here we are," he said. "Doesn't mean it was supposed to be, just means it is." She seemed to sit with that for a moment, turning it over. Then she looked toward the hallway where Lily's door was closed, and the expression on her face was one he hadn't seen from her before. Open in a way the rest of her wasn't, unguarded, like something she hadn't meant to let show. "She's remarkable," Victoria said. "Your daughter." "I know," he said. Simple and sure, the way he said it every time. Because it was the one thing he never needed to qualify. Outside, the city did what cities do at night. Settled into its lower register, the distant sounds of traffic and the occasional voice, the world continuing on without particular regard for the people inside it. Ethan turned off the lamp at 10, and Victoria went down the hall, and he lay on the pull-out couch again with his eyes on the ceiling. Somewhere across town, a man named Marcus Hale was sitting with the fact that Victoria had survived again and recalibrating and deciding what came next. Ethan stared at the ceiling and thought about that, and about the chain in the wheelchair, and about the gray sedan in the lot, and about a burn scar on a man's left forearm. He didn't sleep much, but this time it was less about fear and more about thinking, which felt different, which felt almost like purpose, which was something he hadn't had a clean version of in a while. Renata called on the second morning using a number Victoria didn't recognize, which meant she'd been careful, which meant she understood the situation was serious without needing it spelled out. The call lasted 4 minutes. Victoria listened more than she spoke, and when she hung up, she sat with the dead phone in her lap and her eyes on the kitchen window and didn't say anything for a moment. Ethan waited. "She has the codes," Victoria said. "She pulled them from the location last night, but she's being watched." "Watched how?" "Someone's been outside her building since yesterday afternoon. She noticed because the same car was there when she left for work and when she came home. Dark blue. No plates she could read." Victoria set the phone on the table. "She's smart enough not to lead them to us. She didn't come here directly." "Where is she now?" "Her sister's place, across town. She went there for dinner last night and stayed over. Normal enough that it shouldn't flag." Victoria paused. "But getting the codes from her to me without whoever's watching her following that thread, that's the problem." Ethan was quiet for a moment, turning the shape of it over. "Does she drive?" "Yes." "Does Marcus's man, Slade, does he know what Renata looks like?" "Probably. She's been my assistant for 6 years. She's been visible at enough company events." "So direct handoff is out." He leaned back in his chair. "Does she have someone she trusts? Someone not connected to Hale Dynamics?" Victoria thought about it. Her sister's husband works at a hotel downtown, the Caldwell. He's not connected to anything. If Renata passes the codes to her brother-in-law and he drops them somewhere public, front desk of the hotel, held under a name, that breaks the chain. Whoever's watching Renata watches Renata. They're not watching a hotel desk clerk who has no visible connection to anything. Victoria looked at him. Something had shifted in her expression from the day before. Less of the guarded, careful distance, more of the direct attention of someone who is actually working alongside another person rather than managing them. "That could work? Can you trust the brother-in-law?" "I don't know him, but Renata trusts her sister and her sister trusts him, and the chain is short enough." She paused. "I'd have to tell Renata what to write down. The codes can't be transmitted digitally, that's the whole point. She'd need to copy them by hand onto something that can be picked up physically. Tell her to write them on the inside page of any paperback novel, something generic. Leave it at the Caldwell front desk for a guest checking in under..." He thought for a second. "Under the name Daniel Marsh." "That's not your name." "No. That's the point." The hotel pickup took until early afternoon to arrange, and in the space between the plan and its execution, there was time, which was its own kind of pressure. Time in a small apartment with a woman he'd known for 2 days, the legal pad on the table between them filling up with notes, the morning moving through the windows at its own pace, regardless of what either of them were feeling about it. They worked. That was the honest word for it. Victoria went through everything she knew about Marcus's financial structure. Dates, amounts, the names of the shell companies, and the banks he'd used, and Ethan mapped it on the legal pad in the shorthand he'd developed in the Navy for keeping operational information organized in his head. It wasn't elegant, but it was useful, and Victoria understood useful, and they fell into a rhythm that felt natural enough that the strangeness of the situation receded to the background. Around 10, she made a mistake on one of the dates, gave him the wrong year on a transfer, and he caught it because it conflicted with something she'd said the night before, and he mentioned it, and she stopped and went back through it and realized she was wrong, and said so. "You have a good memory," she said. "I have a trained memory. Different thing." "What's the difference?" "Good memory is natural. Trained memory is what you get when forgetting something could get people killed." He said it without drama, as a fact. "You stop forgetting." She was quiet for a moment. "Were you good at it? The operational part?" "I was good at the parts that required patience and reading a situation. Not as good at the parts that required doing exactly what I was told when I thought what I was told was wrong. That sounds like a character reference and a complaint at the same time. That's more or less what my CO said. He flipped to a new page on the pad. Walk me through the Halcyon group again. You said Marcus set it up 18 months ago. She walked him through it again. He listened and wrote and didn't interrupt. And she noticed, she'd begun noticing these things, that he had the particular quality of attention that didn't feel like performance. He wasn't nodding to show her he was listening. He was just listening. Ethan picked up the novel at the Caldwell at 11:45, using the name Daniel Marsh with a straight face and the calm of someone for whom lying smoothly had been a job requirement. The desk clerk handed over a worn paperback thriller without curiosity or ceremony, and Ethan walked it to his truck and opened it in the parking structure and found Renata's handwriting on the inside front cover, a sequence of letters and numbers arranged in 3 lines, small and precise, with the pencil marks already fading because she'd gone over them lightly on purpose. He photographed it with his phone, closed the book, and drove back to the apartment. When Victoria saw the photo, her whole body changed. Not dramatically. She didn't make a sound or reach out, but the tension that had been running through her since the pier, the particular held-in quality of someone waiting for the other shoe, eased slightly. Not gone, just less total. "This is it," she said. "This gets you into the files?" "This gets me into everything." She looked up at him. "I need a secure connection, not this apartment's Wi-Fi. It's registered to you, and if they're thorough enough, they've already flagged your address from the pier." She thought for a moment. "The library on Carver Street has a public terminal network, individual sessions, no login required. That's also public. Anyone could be watching the terminal. Not if the session is encrypted end-to-end. I have a VPN protocol I can run through the browser. It won't be visible from the network side." She paused. "It's not perfect, but it's better than here and better than anywhere connected to me." It was the best option they had. Sometimes the best option was just the least bad one. They went at 2 in the afternoon, the middle of the day when the library was busy enough that 2 more people at a terminal weren't notable. Ethan pushed the chair, and they moved through the stacks to the terminal alcove in the back, and Victoria worked for 22 minutes while Ethan stood at the end of the row and watched the entrance and thought about nothing except the entrance. She came out of it with her jaw set and her hands in her lap, and her eyes doing the thing they did when she was processing something that she needed a moment to absorb. "I have them," she said. Quiet, almost like she hadn't entirely believed until this moment that it would work. All of it. All of it. Transferred to an encrypted cloud partition that Marcus doesn't have the architecture to locate, let alone access. She exhaled, slow and deliberate. "I have enough to make him disappear from public life for a long time." "Then we need to talk about how to use it," Ethan said. "I know." She looked up at him. "But not here." On the walk back to the truck, 2 things happened. The first was that Ethan noticed a man in a gray jacket near the library entrance who'd been there when they went in and was still there when they came out, which might have been nothing and might not have been. The second was that he noticed the man looking at his phone, then looking up, then at Victoria, then back at his phone. Ethan didn't change his pace. He put a hand on the back of the chair, natural, and steered slightly left, taking them between 2 parked cars rather than along the sidewalk. "Don't look," he said, quiet. "What is it?" "Man at the entrance. He may have recognized you. Keep moving and don't react." They got to the truck. He loaded the chair and got Victoria in and pulled out of the lot onto Carver Street heading west, away from the apartment, and drove for 3 minutes before he said anything. "You okay?" "Yes." She was looking in the side mirror. "Do you see him?" "No. Either we're clean or he called it in and someone else picks it up later. I don't know which yet." He drove another block. "I'm going to take the long way back." "Okay. Tell me if anything looks wrong to you." "I don't know what wrong looks like in traffic." "If a car has been behind us for more than 4 turns, that's wrong." He glanced in the rear view. "Otherwise, just tell me if you see the blue sedan Renata described." She watched. He drove. Nothing materialized. By the time they got back to the apartment, Ethan had decided it had probably been nothing. A man checking his phone, looking up, coincidence of timing. But probably wasn't the same as certainly. and he filed it in the part of his mind where he put things that needed to stay active. That evening, the three of them had dinner together in the kitchen, which had become, by the second night, a thing that happened without anyone deciding it should. Lily had appointed herself responsible for setting the table, which she did with extreme seriousness, forks and napkins, and the good glasses. The good glasses were the 4 that didn't have small chips in them, arranged with the precision of someone who believed the table deserved to be taken seriously. "We're having spaghetti," Lily announced to Victoria. "Dad only makes it one way, but it's really good his way." "I believe you," Victoria said. He puts garlic in the sauce, not from a jar, real garlic." "The jar is fine," Ethan said from the stove. "You always say real garlic is better." "I say a lot of things." Lily looked at Victoria with the expression of someone seeking confirmation of something. "He says that when he knows he's right but doesn't want to have a whole conversation about it." Victoria looked at Ethan's back, and the corner of her mouth moved in a way that was the beginning of a smile and didn't quite get there. "Good to know." The meal was not remarkable. The sauce was good because it was simple, and he knew what he was doing with it. And Lily talked about a girl in her class who had claimed she could speak French but couldn't actually speak French, which she'd confirmed by looking up the words on the classroom computer. And Victoria asked questions about this situation with what appeared to be genuine investment in how it resolved. And Ethan ate and listened and didn't say much and felt, for a strange suspended moment, the outline of something that he had stopped letting himself think about. A table with more than 2 people at it, a meal that had a shape because of the number of people present, a conversation that went in directions he hadn't predicted. He cleared the plates and told himself it wasn't that, because it wasn't that, and washed the dishes while Lily showed Victoria her horse drawings, the entire portfolio, spread across the table with the explanatory commentary of a curator opening an exhibition. After Lily was in bed, Victoria said, "Tell me about the mission." They were at the table again. The legal pad was there, but the notes were secondary now. Something had shifted in the tone of the evening. The meal, maybe, or the library, or the accumulated weight of 2 days in close quarters with someone. The way it made certain conversations easier and certain silences less negotiable. Ethan looked at her. "No, you don't have to. I'm not—" She stopped, started again. "You said you made a decision and teammates died. You've been carrying that since you left. I can see it in the way you talk about the military. Like it's something that belongs to someone else now, someone you don't entirely respect." He was quiet. "I'm not asking to fix anything," she said. "I'm not a therapist. I'm asking because you've listened to everything I've said about Marcus and my company and my failures, and you haven't offered me a verdict about any of it, and I want to do the same for you if you'll let me." Ethan looked at the surface of the table for a moment. Then he said, "There was a family in a building we were moving through, civilian. They weren't supposed to be there. The intelligence said the building was clear. But they were there, a woman and 2 kids, and my team was taking fire from the upper floor, and the protocol was to secure forward and not stop for civilians in an active engagement." He said it without inflection, which was the only way he'd ever found to say it. "I stopped," he said. "I pulled them out of the room they were in and got them to a back exit. It took 4 minutes." He paused. "In those 4 minutes, 2 of my teammates were in a position they wouldn't have been in if I'd been where I was supposed to be. They didn't make it out of the building." The kitchen was very quiet. "The official finding was that I violated protocol in an active engagement with fatal consequences," he said, "which is accurate. Factually, that is what happened." He looked up. "The woman and the 2 kids got out. I've thought about whether that changes anything, and I genuinely don't know. I've thought about it for 4 years, and I still don't know." Victoria was looking at him with that direct, unperformed attention. "What were their names?" she asked. "Your teammates." He looked at her. "Sandoval and Reyes." "Did they have families?" "Sandoval had a wife and a little girl. Reyes was engaged." He stopped. "Why are you asking?" "Because you told me the protocol and the finding and the outcome," she said. "And you didn't tell me their names. I wanted to hear them." He didn't say anything for a moment. "I'm not going to tell you it wasn't your fault," she said, "or that it was. I don't know enough to say either thing honestly, and I think you'd see through it anyway. She held his gaze. What I can tell you is that what I see from the pier from the last 2 days is someone who stops for people. That's not nothing. That doesn't clean the ledger. I know it doesn't, but it's not nothing. Ethan sat with that, not accepting it, not rejecting it, just letting it be in the room. Your ledger isn't clean either, he said, finally. Not unkindly. No, she said, it isn't. So what do we do with that? I think we just keep going, she said. I don't know what else there is. He almost smiled, not quite. Yeah, he said. That's about where I've landed, too. The next morning brought a problem. Ethan had set a light trip. One of the things he'd done after getting settled in the apartment was establish a few basic early warning measures, old habits that hadn't entirely decomposed. A piece of tape across the bottom of the front door, placed at a height that a door opening from outside would disrupt. A small wedge under the back window. Basic and low-tech, the kind of thing that didn't require equipment and didn't draw attention. The tape was intact. The wedge was not. He stood in the kitchen at 5:40 in the morning and looked at the back window from across the room without approaching it. The wedge was on the floor instead of under the window frame. It had either fallen, possible if it had been placed imperfectly, except he hadn't placed it imperfectly. He'd done it the same way he'd done it for 4 years, or something had come in contact with the window from outside. He went back to the pull-out couch, sat on it, and thought about this quietly for 3 minutes before getting up and going to Victoria's room and knocking softly. She was awake immediately, which told him she'd been sleeping lightly. What is it? Someone tested the back window last night, he said. I don't know if they got a read on the apartment or if they were just checking buildings in the area, but I want to move today, not here. She didn't argue. She didn't ask if he was sure or tell him he might be misreading it. She just said, where? I have someone. Former teammate. He's out now, runs a motorcycle repair place on the east side. He's got an apartment above the shop and he owes me a favor I've never called in. He paused. I'll call him at 6. He'll say yes. You're sure? About the favor, yes. About whether we're actually being watched or whether the wedge just fell? No. But I'd rather be wrong about the threat than right about it and unprepared. She looked at him for a moment in the early dark of the room. Okay, she said. I'll pack what I have. Light, he said. Fast. I know fast, she said, and he believed her. Tick. His former teammate's name was Danny Ruiz, and he answered on the second ring at 6:03 with the voice of someone who'd been up for a while or had never gone to sleep. It was hard to tell with Danny. Ethan explained the situation in 3 sentences, fewer than he would have given anyone else, but Danny had the useful quality of requiring very little setup to understand the essential shape of things. Come now, Danny said. I'll put coffee on. I've got my daughter with me. I'll put more coffee on. The East Side shop was a 20-minute drive, and they made it in the gray early light of a Wednesday morning, with Lily half asleep in the back seat and Victoria in the passenger seat watching the side mirror without being asked. Danny Ruiz met them in the alley behind the shop. A compact, dark-haired man in his early 40s with grease permanently worked into the knuckles of both hands and the calm of someone who'd decided a long time ago that anxiety was inefficient. He looked at Ethan, then at Victoria, then at Lily, asleep against the door. Okay, he said. That was all. The apartment above the shop was 3 rooms and smelled of motor oil and coffee, and it was more space than Ethan's place on Callaway, and it had a back entrance through the roof hatch that Danny showed Ethan immediately without being asked, because they'd had the same training and understood the same math. 2 ways in and out. Sight lines on the alley. A neighbor on the left who was a retired woman who noticed everything, which in this context was an asset rather than an inconvenience. Lily woke up when they carried her up the stairs and looked around with the blurry acceptance of a child who'd been moved while sleeping and was prepared to deal with it. She saw Danny and said, "Hi." Danny said, "Hi." She went back to sleep on the couch. Ethan stood in the kitchen of the apartment above the motorcycle shop and looked out the window at the alley below and thought about the window wedge on the floor and the gray sedan at the pier lot and the man with the gray jacket outside the library. And he thought about how patterns worked, and he thought about what it meant that the pattern was tightening. "He's escalating," he said. Not to anyone in particular. Victoria was behind him, at the kitchen table, and she heard it. "I know," she said. "The pier didn't work, and he knows I'm alive and that I have help, and he knows time is working against him now. Which means he's going to do something less careful." "Yes." Ethan turned from the window. "Then we need to move first." He said it quietly, the way he said most things, but she heard what was underneath it. Not aggression, not impulse, just the cold clarity of someone who had finally found the angle that mattered. "Tell me about the corporate event," he said. "The one Marcus is hosting next week." Victoria's expression changed. Not surprise, she'd been working toward this too. He could see it. But the particular focus of someone who just heard the conversation arrive at the place where it needed to go. "The Hale Dynamics Annual Investor Summit," she said. "Thursday. He's been planning it for 3 months. The entire board will be there. The major shareholders. 3 members of the Federal Regulatory Committee he's been cultivating. That's everyone he needs to make permanent what he's done. And everyone who needs to see what he's actually done," she said. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "Tell me everything about that event, the venue, the security, the schedule, all of it." She told him, and he listened with the full attention of someone building something, piece by piece, in the space between what existed and what needed to happen, and for the first time since the pier, the shape of what came next had a structure he could work with. Outside, Harwick woke up around them. Traffic and distance and the smell of coffee and motor oil. Ordinary and indifferent, carrying on the way it always did, knowing nothing about what was being decided in the apartment above the motorcycle shop on a Wednesday morning in the gray autumn light. The planning took 4 days, which wasn't enough and was all they had. Ethan worked the way he'd always worked when time was the constraint, not by cutting corners, but by deciding early which corners weren't load-bearing and which ones were, and only putting his attention on the ones that mattered. Danny Ruiz's apartment above the motorcycle shop became, over those 4 days, something between a safe house and a war room, the kitchen table buried under printed floor plans that Victoria had pulled from the architectural firm that had designed the Meridian Conference Center 3 years ago, event schedules that Renata had forwarded through the same indirect channel as the codes, and Ethan's legal pads, now on their 3rd booklet, covered in his small, precise handwriting. Danny came and went from the shop below and asked few questions, and provided useful things without being prompted. Coffee, food, an extra burner phone he had from a period in his life he didn't discuss, a detailed verbal layout of the Meridian's loading dock from a job he'd done there 2 years ago, installing a custom exhaust display for a trade show. The loading dock information was the most useful thing anyone gave them in the first 2 days. Lily stayed. That was the part Ethan hadn't fully figured out before they moved, and it was the part that bothered him most. Not the plan itself, not the risk to himself, but the fact that his daughter was sleeping on a pull-out couch above a motorcycle shop because the apartment on Callaway was compromised and he had nowhere else to put her that was both safe and not terrifying to explain. He told her it was an adventure. She'd accepted this with the flexible pragmatism of a child who'd learned that her father sometimes said things like that when the real explanation was complicated. On the second evening, Lily had come to find him at the kitchen table, where he was working through the event security layout, and she'd climbed into the chair next to him and looked at the papers and said, "Is Victoria in trouble?" He'd looked at her. "Why?" "Because she gets a face sometimes, like when you have a face but you don't want me to see it." He'd thought about the honest version and the protective version and landed somewhere in between. "She has a problem that we're working on fixing," he said. Lily considered this. "Is that why we're here?" "Yeah." She looked at the papers on the table. She couldn't read what they said, but she was looking at them with the seriousness of someone who understood that papers on a table in the middle of the night meant something. Then she said, "She looks at me sometimes like she's trying to remember something." "What do you mean?" Lily thought about how to say it. "Like when Mrs. Patterson looks at the photos in her classroom from when she was young, like that." Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. "Okay," Lily said, apparently satisfied that she'd communicated what she needed to, and climbed down from the chair and went back to the couch. He sat with what his daughter had said for a while after that, and didn't entirely know what to do with it, and went back to the floor plans. The plan had 4 parts, which was 2 more than Ethan preferred, and 2 fewer than Victoria initially wanted. She'd come to him on the second day with a more elaborate version. Layers of contingency, multiple simultaneous actions, the kind of architecture that looked comprehensive on paper and collapsed in practice when the first variable changed. He'd listened to all of it and then said simply, "Too many moving pieces." She'd pushed back. "We only get 1 shot at this." Which is exactly why we need it to be simple enough to survive contact with reality. She'd looked at him with the expression of someone who disagreed but was choosing to listen, which was more than he'd expected, and he'd walked her through why each layer she'd added introduced a new point of failure, and how failure at any single point could compromise the whole structure. "The core doesn't change," he said. "We get you in. You get to the server room and initiate the broadcast. Everything else is what we do if something goes wrong." "And if something goes wrong before we reach the server room? Then we improvise." "That's not a plan." "No, it's what happens when plans break down. Having it written on paper doesn't make it more real." He met her eyes. "The plan is simple because simple is what survives. The thing that gets people through isn't the plan. It's the ability to think when the plan is gone." She was quiet for a moment, then, "You've done this before." "Not this exactly, but something like it." He looked at the floor plans. Enough times to know that complexity is the enemy of execution. She'd let him strip the plan back to its core after that. He noticed she didn't do it reluctantly. She did it the way she made most decisions once she'd thought them through, which was cleanly, without lingering on the version she was leaving behind. What they had in the end was this. The Hale Dynamics Investor Summit was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Meridian Conference Center. A reception at 6, keynote presentation at 7:30, dinner to follow. Marcus would present the company's annual performance in the main ballroom with the board, major shareholders, and the 3 regulatory committee members seated at the front. The presentation would be broadcast on the internal conference network, which fed to screens throughout the venue, including the overflow rooms and the press area. The Meridian's network architecture was connected to a central server room on the building's 2nd floor, standard for a venue of its size, used for everything from the HVAC system to the AV presentation feeds. Victoria knew the architecture because Hale Dynamics had used the Meridian for 3 previous events, and her team had always interfaced with the venue's technical staff. She also knew that the server room had a secondary access panel that bypassed the main security checkpoint, accessible from the stairwell on the building's east side. What she intended to do once inside the server room was simple in conception and difficult in execution. Redirect the internal broadcast feed to play the decrypted financial evidence, the transfers, the communications, the shell company documents, on every screen in the building simultaneously. Every investor, every board member, every regulatory official, every journalist in the press area would see the same thing at the same time, which meant Marcus couldn't suppress it, couldn't spin it in the room, couldn't get ahead of it. "Once it's on those screens," Victoria said, on the 3rd night of planning, "he has no moves. The regulatory people are in the room. The board is in the room. There are journalists present. He can't contain it." "He'll try to have us removed before it reaches that point," Ethan said. "He'll have private security in the building." "I know. Slade might be there." "I know that too." "You understand that between when he realizes you're in the building and when the broadcast starts, there's a window where he's going to do whatever he thinks he can get away with. Which is why you need to be between him and me during that window." He looked at her across the table. "Yeah," he said. "That's why." She held his gaze, not with drama, not with the performed courage of someone convincing themselves, just steady and present and clear-eyed about what she was agreeing to. He'd seen that quality in people before. Not often, but enough to recognize it. It wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision that the fear was secondary to the thing that needed doing. "Renata will be inside," Victoria continued. "She has a legitimate invitation as a company employee. She'll be our eyes from the inside. She can text me when Marcus is on the stage and when his security is positioned. We need Danny as a second set of eyes on the outside, Ethan said. Building perimeter, specifically the east entrance and the loading dock. You trust him? With my life. He paused. I already have. She accepted this. There's one more thing, she said. She reached into the folder she'd been keeping her printed documents in and slid a single page across the table. I've prepared a letter to the board chair, to the senior regulatory contact, and to 3 journalists I know who cover corporate accountability. It goes out at 7:45, automatically from an account Marcus can't access, whether we succeed in the building or not. It contains a summary of the evidence and the location of the encrypted files. She paused. It's a backup. If something happens to me before the broadcast, nothing happens to you before the broadcast. If it does, she said, with the firmness of someone completing a sentence they'd started, the letter goes out anyway. Marcus still loses. It just takes longer. Ethan looked at the page, then at her. You set this up before you told me about it. Yes. When? The library. I set it up while I was in the secure session. She said it matter-of-factly, and he understood from her tone that she wasn't apologizing for the sequence of decisions, just explaining it. He thought about whether to be bothered by this and decided it was the right call, even if the order of operations had been hers to make unilaterally. Okay, he said. You're not angry. Would being angry change anything? No. Then no. He pulled the page back to his side of the table. 7:45 is our hard deadline. We need to be in that server room and broadcasting before that. If we're not, then the letter handles it. And Marcus knows he's finished either way. Yes? Good, Ethan said. Cornered people are dangerous, but they're predictable. He'll try to run. He looked at the floor plan. Let's make sure he doesn't get to the exits. Thursday came the way significant days often do. Without ceremony, just the next morning following the one before it, the sky doing something gray and non-committal over the city, Danny's coffee thick and too hot, Lily eating cereal at the kitchen table while cartoons played on Danny's small television and Ethan checked the time every few minutes without meaning to. He'd arranged for Danny's neighbor, the retired woman downstairs, whose name was Mrs. Cho and who had grandchildren Lily's age and an ironclad boredom with her own company, to take Lily for the afternoon and evening. He'd explained it as a work event. Mrs. Cho had accepted this with the particular incuriousness of someone who had learned over 8 decades that most things weren't her business and had arrived at 10 with a bag of board games and an offer to make dumplings, which Lily had received with immediate enthusiasm. When Lily hugged him before he left, she held on a beat longer than usual and then let go and looked at him with her mother's eyes. His ex-wife had had this particular directness that Lily had inherited completely and which occasionally undid him, and said, "Come back." Not be careful, not I love you, not a question, just that. Yeah, he said. I will. He and Victoria left Danny's at 4 in the afternoon. Danny left 20 minutes later in his own vehicle, the plan already distributed between the 3 of them in the simple way Ethan preferred. Each person knowing their piece completely and the adjacent pieces enough to adapt if one failed. The city moved around them on the drive, as it always did, indifferent and ordinary, people driving home from work and picking up kids and thinking about dinner, the invisible routine of a Thursday afternoon that had no idea it was the background of something else. Victoria was quiet for most of the drive, not tense, or not more tense than the situation warranted. She was dressed for the event, which had required a brief stop the previous day at a store where she'd chosen, quickly and without apparent deliberation, something that was appropriate for a corporate function without looking like she was trying to make a statement. She'd emerged from the dressing room in 7 minutes flat, which told Ethan something about how she operated under time pressure. Renata just texted, she said, from the passenger seat. Marcus arrived at the venue an hour ago. He has 4 private security personnel that she can see. Positions? 2 at the main entrance, 1 near the ballroom doors, 1 she hasn't located yet. That's Slade, Ethan said. He'll be somewhere that gives him a view of the space without being a fixed position. He moves. She relayed this to Renata. Renata texted back 30 seconds later. She says there's a man matching the description you gave, tall, burns on the left forearm, in the mezzanine area above the main floor. Mezzanine gives him sightlines on both the main entrance and the ballroom, Ethan said. He'll see you the moment you're in the main hall. So we don't go through the main hall. Loading dock, he said. Danny's already at the perimeter. Once we're in through the east entrance, we take the stairwell to the second floor before we are visible to anyone in the event space. She had her phone in her lap and was typing to Renata. She can create a distraction at 7:15. She'll tell Marcus's assistant that there's a question about the presentation slides. It's the kind of thing his assistant always escalates to him directly, and it'll pull Marcus off the stage for 5 minutes before the keynote. 5 minutes is enough if we're already in position. He glanced at her. Tell her not to overdo it. A small distraction looks like a distraction. A big one looks like a signal. Victoria typed it, sent it, put the phone face down on her knee. Then she looked out the window at the city going by and said, without particular drama, I'm scared. He glanced over. She was still looking out the window. That's fine, he said. I know it is. I'm just... She paused. I've never done anything like this. Nobody has until they have to. That's not as reassuring as I think you meant it to be. I know, he said, but it's the true version. She turned from the window and looked at him. Are you scared? He thought about whether to be honest and decided there was no point being anything else at this stage. A little, he said, not the way I used to be scared before operations. That was different, more acute, more physical. This is more like, he searched for the word, concerned. I'm concerned about the parts I can't control. Which parts? Slade, whether he has more people inside than Renata can see. Whether Marcus panics before we want him to. He checked the mirror out of habit. The parts that are going to be what they are, regardless of what we plan. And you can operate through that? I've been operating through that for 4 years, he said, just on smaller things. But the loading dock was on the building's northwest side, accessible from a service road that wasn't monitored by the venue's primary camera system. Something Danny had confirmed from his reconnaissance of the building's exterior over the previous 48 hours. Danny was parked on the service road when they arrived, his truck looking like exactly what it was, a working man's vehicle in a place where working men had business. He got out when he saw them pull in and walked over with his hands in his jacket pockets and the unhurried movement of someone who wasn't performing calm, just actually had it. Loading dock is clear, he said. Security ran a pass about 20 minutes ago, hasn't been back. East stairwell door. The latch is worn. It doesn't catch clean unless you pull it hard from outside. From inside, it should open without any resistance. Fire egress, Ethan asked. Clear on all 4 sides. I put eyes on the east and north. The south side has a catering van parked against it that limits exit options, but I don't think we're going that way anyway. No. Ethan looked at the building. Slade's on the mezzanine. If he comes for us, he's going to come from above or from the main floor. He won't know about the server room until the broadcast starts. And when the broadcast starts, then everything changes and we improvise. He looked at Danny. You stay on the perimeter. If anything comes out of the building that shouldn't, you call me. If I call you and say Lily, you go get her from Mrs. Cho and you drive north and you don't stop. Danny looked at him for a moment with the flat, uncomplicated steadiness of someone who'd been asked to do hard things before and found them within his capacity. Got it, he said. Then he looked at Victoria. Take care of him, he said. He's bad at asking for help. Victoria looked at Ethan. I've noticed, she said. They went in through the loading dock at 6:40, which gave them 50 minutes before the keynote and 35 minutes before Renata's distraction. The dock was active with catering staff moving between the service kitchen and the ballroom, and in the particular organized chaos of an event in setup, 2 more people moving through with purpose didn't register as wrong. Ethan had learned that particular lesson early in his operational career. The best way not to be noticed in a busy environment was to move like you belonged there. And the way you moved like you belonged somewhere was to actually have somewhere you were going and to go there directly. They reached the east stairwell without incident. The door latch was exactly as Danny had described. Worn, slightly sticky, opened with one firm push. The stairwell smelled of concrete and cleaning product and was empty. the way service stairwells at events always were, all the human traffic running through the front of the house. Second floor, server room. The door had a keypad that Victoria had the code for. She'd gotten it from the venue's technical coordinator 3 months ago for a previous event and confirmed with Renata 2 days ago that it hadn't been changed. It hadn't been changed. The room was small and dim and warm with the heat of running equipment, racks of servers along both walls, the AV switching unit in the far left corner, which was what they needed. Victoria went to it while Ethan stood at the door, one hand on the handle, watching the gap at the bottom for shadow movement. "How long?" he asked. 10 minutes to set up the redirect. 3 to initiate. She was already working, her hands moving over the panel with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood the system she was working with. Maybe 8, if everything behaves. He watched the gap at the bottom of the door. Everything never behaves. Then 10, she said. Hold the door. He held the door. At 7:12, his phone vibrated. Renata. Distraction initiated. Marcus is off the stage. You have 5 minutes before he comes back. He told Victoria. Almost there, she said. Her voice was steady, but he could hear something underneath it. Not panic, just the tightness of someone working at the edge of their capacity and knowing it. The redirect is set. I need 2 more minutes to cue the files in sequence. You have 2 minutes. She worked. He watched the door. Somewhere below them, the event was moving through its early stages. He could hear the muffled sound of crowd noise, the particular acoustic blur of several hundred people in a large room, glasses and voices, and the distant sound of someone at a microphone doing a sound check. At 7:15, his phone vibrated again. Danny. Someone just came around the east side, tall, jacket, moving fast toward the service entrance, Slade. Victoria, Ethan said. We have maybe 90 seconds. I need 60, she said. You have 60. He heard footsteps in the stairwell. One person moving quickly but not running, the particular cadence of someone who knew where they were going and was trying not to announce themselves. Ethan stepped away from the door and put himself to the side of it, back against the server rack, and waited. The door opened fast and hard, the way it would if someone expected resistance and wasn't getting it, and Slade came through already moving, already looking toward where Victoria was. He'd targeted her as the priority, which was the tactically correct call and was also the mistake, because it meant his attention committed before he'd fully cleared the room. Ethan came off the rack and hit him from the side, not with full force, the space was too confined for that, but targeted, the way that training made targeting automatic, and they went into the far server rack together with a sound like the world disagreeing with itself. Slade was strong and fast and knew what he was doing. This wasn't a clean takedown, it was a scramble in a small warm room between two people who both understood how bodies worked and were both willing to use that understanding badly. Slade got an elbow into Ethan's ribs that took his breath in a way that was going to hurt worse later. Ethan took it and used the contact to redirect the next swing and get behind him, one arm across his throat, the other braced, and Slade went hard against the server rack a second time, and this time his legs decided they were done. Ethan held him down. His ribs were reporting something serious, but the information could wait. Done, he said at Slade's ear. Slade's body was at the specific angle that meant done. Victoria said, from the corner, It's broadcasting. Ethan looked up. The monitor on the AV unit showed the feed, the documents, the financial transfers, the communications, the shell company records, running on every screen in the Meridian Conference Center, every screen in the ballroom, every screen in the overflow rooms, the press area monitors. It's broadcasting, she said again, and her voice had something in it that he'd never heard from her before. Not relief exactly, but the particular quality of something that has been held for a very long time finally being set down. He pulled Slade's hands behind him and used the man's own belt to bind them. Improvised and imperfect, but enough. And then he stood up, and his ribs told him a very clear story about what had just happened, and he told his ribs to be patient. We need to get you down to the ballroom, he said. Victoria was looking at the monitor. On the screen, the documents were running. 3 minutes of material looping. Marcus is going to try to stop it, she said. He can't stop it. It's already in the room. He crossed to her. But you need to be in the room too. You need to be the person they see. Otherwise, it's a data breach with no face on it, and his lawyers spin it as corporate sabotage. She understood this. She'd understood it before he said it. He could tell from the way she straightened and took one breath and became, in a visible and intentional way, the version of herself that ran a company. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." The main ballroom was exactly the kind of controlled chaos that happens when a large room full of people used to being in control of things suddenly isn't. The screens were running. He could see it from the ballroom entrance. The documents scrolling, the numbers, the communications, Marcus's name appearing in context after context that it had no business being in. People were on their phones. People were standing. The three regulatory officials near the front were huddled together in the specific posture of people doing rapid professional calculation. Marcus was on the stage. He was trying to speak into the microphone, and the microphone was live, but nobody was listening to the microphone because the screens were more interesting than anything he could say. He saw Victoria at the entrance. Ethan watched the moment happen, watched Marcus Hale look across the ballroom and see the person who was supposed to be dead standing at the entrance to his event, in the middle of his evidence playing on every screen he owned. And the thing that crossed Marcus's face in that moment was not rage exactly, and not fear exactly. It was the particular expression of someone who has built something elaborate and is watching it understand that it was built on nothing. Victoria walked into the room. She didn't run. She didn't raise her voice. She pushed herself through a crowd that parted, partly because she was in a wheelchair, and partly because there was something in her bearing that made people move. And she went directly to the front of the ballroom where the regulatory officials were standing, and she introduced herself, her actual name, her actual title, the CEO of the company, whose documents were on every screen. And she said, in the clear and even voice of someone who had been preparing this sentence for 8 months, "My name is Victoria Hale. The documents you're looking at are real, they are verified, and I'm prepared to speak with you right now about what they mean." Marcus said something from the stage. Ethan didn't hear what it was because he was watching the room, specifically watching the 2 private security personnel near the ballroom doors who were watching their boss and waiting for instruction. And he was watching a board member near the front who'd pulled out a phone and was already talking to someone. And he was watching the journalists in the press area who had their phones up and were not putting them down. Marcus came off the stage. He came down the side steps quickly, heading toward Victoria, and Ethan moved, cutting through the crowd at an angle that put him in Marcus's path before Marcus had covered half the distance. They were close enough that Ethan could see his face. Marcus Hale was 51 years old and had the expensive, maintained look of someone who'd spent money making sure he looked like he was doing well, and right now none of that was working. His eyes were doing a rapid, terrible calculation about options. "You need to stop," Ethan said. Quiet. Just between them. "Who are you?" Marcus said. "Someone your people couldn't handle twice." Ethan held his ground. He didn't touch him. He didn't need to. "It's done. You understand that, right? Whatever you're thinking about doing right now, but it doesn't change what's on those screens. The people who need to see it have already seen it." Marcus looked past him at Victoria, who was speaking with the regulatory officials, one of whom had already taken out a badge that had a federal seal on it and was holding it where she could see it. "The exits," Ethan said, still quiet, "are being watched. I'd recommend you stay where you are." Marcus Hale stood in the middle of his own event and looked at the screens and looked at the federal official and looked at the woman he'd tried to have killed twice, who was alive and speaking in complete sentences to the people who mattered most. And he made a decision that Ethan could read in his body before it happened. The shoulders dropping, the weight shifting back, the particular physics of a man abandoning forward momentum. He stayed where he was. It took 40 minutes for the first federal authorities to arrive on site. 40 minutes during which the room held its breath in the uncomfortable way that rooms do when something enormous has happened and nobody is entirely sure what the procedure is. Victoria spoke for most of those 40 minutes. To the regulatory officials, to the board chair who'd separated himself from the cluster of executives and come to find her, to the lead journalist from the press area who had identified herself and been given, with Ethan standing 2 feet away watching the room, a single statement that was careful and complete and said exactly what needed to be said without a word that wasn't necessary. When the federal agents came in through the main entrance, the room shifted again, people stepping back, conversations stopping. the instinctive human reaction to authority arriving with purpose. Ethan watched them move to Marcus, watched Marcus's face do its final calculation, watched the moment resolve. He stepped back. His ribs were a sustained and specific complaint. He found a pillar near the wall and put his back against it and breathed. Renata appeared from somewhere in the crowd and went directly to Victoria, and the two women looked at each other for a moment with the expression of people who have been on the same side of something very difficult for a very long time. And Victoria reached out and put a hand on her arm and said something Ethan couldn't hear from where he was standing. He looked at his phone. A text from Danny. Perimeter clear. Slade's man came out the east side and I called it in on the tip line like you said. They're handling it. He texted back, good, thanks. Danny texted back a single character, a period, which, from Danny, was practically a speech. Ethan stood against the pillar in the Meridian Conference Center's main ballroom and watched the controlled aftermath of something falling, all the pieces still in motion, but the outcome no longer in question. And he thought about a woman in a wheelchair on a pier in a storm, and a chain threaded through the spokes of a wheel, and a 7-year-old who had said, come back with the simplicity of someone who expected to be heard. He thought about that. He put his phone in his pocket. He breathed through the ribs, which were manageable, and waited for the room to finish doing what rooms do after the thing that was coming has finally arrived. Victoria found him at the pillar 20 minutes later. She looked exhausted in the specific way of someone who has been holding something up by force of will for a very long time and has just been allowed to put it down. She also looked more present than he'd ever seen her. Not the controlled executive bearing, not the careful management of expression, just a person standing in a room being exactly as tired and relieved and not quite okay as the situation warranted. She looked at him for a moment without saying anything. Ribs, he said, preempting the question her eyes were asking. How bad? Probably 2, maybe 1 and a bruise. I've had worse. You should see a doctor. I will. He looked at the room. Are you done here? The part where you have to be present? For tonight, she exhaled. They're going to want full cooperation starting tomorrow. Interviews, documents, everything. It's going to be a long process. But tonight is done. She looked at him. I want to call Lily. He took out his phone and called Mrs. Cho's number and held it toward Victoria. And she took it and held it to her ear, and when Lily answered on the second ring, Victoria said, Hi, it's Victoria. Your dad's right here. He's fine. We just wanted to check on you. And then she listened, and the expression on her face as she listened to whatever Lily was saying about the dumplings and the board game was the kind of expression that doesn't have a clean name. Something between an arrival and a recognition, a face saying yes, this is what I was missing without knowing I was missing it. She handed the phone back when Lily had said goodnight. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Ethan called Danny to come around to the front, and the three of them left through the main entrance into the night air of a city that had no idea what had just changed inside one of its buildings. And Ethan stood on the steps of the Meridian Conference Center and breathed the cool air and thought, very simply and without ceremony, that they had made it to the other side of this, and that the other side felt like standing on solid ground after a long time in water, ordinary and real and sufficient. Just that. Just enough. The hospital released Ethan the following morning with 2 confirmed cracked ribs, a bruise across his left side that had gone the color of a storm cloud, and a prescription for painkillers he filled but didn't take because he needed to be clear-headed for the next several weeks, and clear-headed and cracked ribs were just something you negotiated between yourself. He drove back to Danny's with his left arm braced slightly against the door and the window down because the morning air was cold and clean, and he wanted to feel it. And he thought about the night before in the way he always processed things after they were done. Not reliving it, not congratulating himself, just running through the sequence to see if there was anything he'd missed, anything that had gone differently than it should have, anything that needed filing away for the future. The future. That word had a different texture this morning than it had for a while. Lily was awake when he got there, eating cereal at Danny's table with the self-possessed ease of a child who had decided that wherever her father was, she was home. She looked at him when he came in, and her eyes did the inventory that she'd learned to do without knowing she was doing it, checking him the way he checked rooms, looking for what was wrong before deciding everything was okay. "You're holding your side," she said. Good morning to you too. Are you hurt? A little. It's handled. He sat down carefully, which he tried to do without it looking like carefully, and failed because Lily was watching with the specific attention of someone for whom his well-being was a primary data point. I'm fine, Bug. Everything went okay. She looked at him for another moment. Then she pushed her cereal bowl toward him in the wordless offering that she'd been doing since she was 4. When she'd first understood that giving someone a portion of what you had was a way of saying something that didn't have a word. He pulled the bowl toward him and ate some of her cereal. It was the kind with the little squares. It was fine. Where's Victoria? Lily asked. She had things she needed to handle this morning. She'll come by later. Lily accepted this and went back to her own breakfast, and Ethan sat at Danny's table with his cracked ribs and his daughter's cereal and the particular quiet of a morning that had followed a night that had changed several things, and he let himself sit in it without rushing toward what came next. What came next came quickly anyway, because that's the nature of consequences. They don't wait for you to feel ready. The federal investigation opened formally within 48 hours of the Meridian event. Marcus Hale was arrested on Thursday night and arraigned Friday morning on charges that included securities fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, and, after Slade cooperated, which he did with the efficiency of someone who had calculated that loyalty to Marcus was no longer a viable financial position, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. The charges were federal, which meant the process was federal, which meant it was going to be long and procedurally complex and ultimately very thorough. Victoria cooperated with everything. She sat across from federal investigators in a conference room at her lawyer's office for 3 days straight, and she gave them everything she had. Every document, every communication, every piece of the financial architecture she'd reverse engineered over 8 months of quiet, dangerous work. Her lawyer was a compact woman named Selena Park, who had the manner of someone who'd spent 20 years in rooms where people lied to her and had consequently become very good at identifying when they weren't, and who had apparently told Victoria on the first morning that this was either going to be very clean or very messy, depending entirely on whether Victoria left anything out. Victoria left nothing out. She told Ethan about this on the 4th day, when the immediate intensity of the investigation had settled into the longer rhythm of something that was going to take months to fully resolve, but was no longer in danger of collapsing. They were sitting in the small conference room adjacent to Selena's office, waiting for the afternoon session to begin, and Victoria had a coffee she wasn't drinking and the look of someone running on less sleep than was compatible with long-term function. She told me I was either the most honest client she'd ever had or the best actress, Victoria said. What did you tell her? I told her I was too tired to act. She turned the coffee cup. I told them about the Ridgeway acquisition, about the workers, about what happened to Gene Becker's shop. She looked at Ethan directly. I didn't have to. It wasn't relevant to the fraud charges. But Selena asked me if there was anything I'd done inside the company that I wasn't proud of, and I said yes, and I told her. He looked at her. She said it was probably going to come up in discovery anyway, Victoria said. She also said that it was better to have said it first. A pause. I didn't say it because of the strategy. I said it because you were going to know either way whether I had or hadn't. Ethan sat with that. What did they say? That it was a business decision, not a criminal one, which is accurate and also not the whole answer. She finally picked up her coffee and drank some of it. The whole answer is that it was a business decision that I made without thinking about what a business decision is actually deciding about. People's lives. What they can build and what gets taken away. She set the cup down. I've been thinking about what to do about that. About whether there's anything that can be done. Is there? Some of it, maybe. She looked at her hands. Not all of it. Gene Becker can't get 2 years back. The workers who scattered and found other things, or didn't, I can't undo that. But the site is still undeveloped. Marcus put it in a holding company pending rezoning that never came through. As CEO, I can redirect it. Redirect it how? That's what I've been working on. She glanced at him. What would Gene Becker need to rebuild? Ethan looked at her for a long moment. You'd have to ask him that. I know, I will. She held his gaze. But I'm asking you first because you know him and I don't. and because I want to get it right before I walk into that conversation. He thought about Gene Becker, 62 years old, the kind of man who'd named his shop after himself, not out of ego, but because the shop was him, because every repair done in that space carried something of who he was and what he believed work was supposed to mean. Ethan had spent 2 years handing Gene tools and listening to him talk about engines, and about his father, who taught him to fix things, and about the guys on the floor who were good at their work and deserved to stay good at it. He'd need the space, Ethan said, and he'd need it to be his, not a franchise, not a partnership with conditions. His name, his way of running it. I can do that. And he'd want the same guys back if they'll come, not because they have to, but because the shop was built on those relationships. I understand that. And he'd probably tell you he doesn't want charity. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then I'll tell him it's not charity, it's a debt. She said it simply, without the performance of humility, just the flat statement of someone who had done the accounting and arrived at an honest number. Because it is. Lily's surgery was scheduled 6 weeks after the Meridian event. Victoria had called Ethan on the 5th day after the investigation opened. While he was at his moving company job, she'd insisted he go back to work, and he'd gone, cracked ribs and all, because the bills didn't take a break. And she'd told him that she was funding the procedure directly, personally, not through the company, and that she'd already spoken with the surgical team at Harwick Medical and that the date was set. He'd stood in the parking lot of the moving company with his phone against his ear and not said anything for a moment. Ethan, she said, yeah, I know you're going to push back on this. I'm working on it, he said. Don't. Her voice was direct but not hard. This is not me managing you or buying something. This is me doing the one specific thing that I can do that matters right now. Let me do it. He looked at the sky above the parking lot, which was doing something blue and ordinary. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. He went back inside and finished the shift and didn't tell his coworkers anything. And on the drive home, he thought about what it felt like to have something you'd been carrying put down by someone else's hands, and whether you were allowed to feel relieved without feeling like you'd failed. And he decided, after a while, that maybe those two things didn't have to cancel each other out. Maybe you could be relieved and still be the person who'd kept carrying it until someone helped. Maybe that was just what it looked like when people actually did for each other what people were supposed to do. The surgery was 7 hours. Ethan sat in the waiting room for all 7 of them. He was bad at waiting in the specific way of people who are used to being the person doing something. And he sat in the plastic chair and he drank terrible coffee and he read nothing that he picked up and he checked his phone and put it down and checked it again. And at hour 4, a nurse came out and said things were going well. And he said thank you. And she left. And he sat back down and went back to waiting. Victoria arrived at hour 5. She came through the waiting room doors in her chair and found him and sat beside him, and didn't say anything, just was there, which was the right thing, and which he recognized as the right thing without needing to say so. At hour 6 and 40 minutes, Lily's surgeon came out. He was a calm man in his 50s named Dr. Aldrin, who had the unhurried manner of someone who'd delivered enough news of both kinds that he'd stopped dramatizing the delivery. And he sat down across from Ethan and said that the procedure had gone well, that they'd corrected the defect cleanly, that Lily was in recovery and would be awake within the hour and asking for her rabbit, which they should probably make sure was available. Ethan looked at the surgeon for a moment. "She's okay," the surgeon said, slightly redundantly but apparently sensing it was necessary. "Yeah," Ethan said. His voice came out rough at the edges. "Yeah, okay." He sat there for another moment with his hands clasped between his knees and his eyes on the floor, and Victoria put her hand over his, just that, just her hand over both of his, and he let it stay there, and neither of them said anything, and the waiting room did what waiting rooms do, hummed with its fluorescent indifference to the enormous private things happening inside it. Lily's recovery was 6 weeks of enforced stillness that she found deeply objectionable and communicated clearly and often. She was not a good patient in the sense of being compliant and quiet. She was a good patient in the sense that she did what she was told while making her feelings about it thoroughly known, which Ethan thought was probably the healthier version anyway. Victoria came to see her twice a week during the recovery period. She always brought a book, not children's books, actual books, middle-grade novels that were maybe 2 years ahead of where Lily currently was, which Lily received as a vote of confidence in her abilities and rose to meet. They read together, Victoria reading aloud while Lily followed along, and sometimes they argued about what a character should have done differently, which were the most animated conversations Ethan ever witnessed from the kitchen, where he was usually finding something to do that wasn't listening. He was always listening. He watched his daughter heal. It was not a dramatic or cinematic process. It was slow and incremental, and punctuated by discomfort and boredom, and one very bad night around the 3rd week when Lily's pain spiked, and she cried in a way she hadn't cried since she was very small. And Ethan sat on the edge of her bed with his hand on her back and didn't say anything useful because there wasn't anything useful to say, just was there the way you're there for someone when being there is all there is. By the end of 6 weeks, she was moving more freely. By 8 weeks, she was running in the apartment in a way that the surgeon had told Ethan to discourage, but that he found he couldn't bring himself to stop, because the running was the most specific evidence that the thing he'd been afraid of for 4 years was no longer the shape of her future. He let her run. The auto shop opened in the spring. It took 4 months from Victoria's conversation with Jean Becker to the day the sign went up, which was faster than Ethan had expected, and about exactly as fast as Victoria had said it would be when she put her mind to something. The Ridgeway site had been repurposed, not just the shop, but several adjacent spaces, some of which went to other small businesses that had been displaced in the same acquisition wave 3 years ago. The rest held for a community workshop program that Victoria had funded through the foundation she'd incorporated in January. The foundation was called the Halcyon Community Trust, which Ethan had pointed out was the name of one of Marcus's shell companies, and Victoria had said yes, she knew. She'd chosen it deliberately because she thought it was the right kind of reclamation. He'd thought about that and decided he agreed with the principle, even if the name still made him slightly uncomfortable in a way he couldn't fully articulate. Jean Becker's shop was called Becker's again. Same sign, reproduced from a photograph that one of the former employees had on his phone, the same dark red letters on white that had been there for 20 years before the buyout. Jean had been suspicious of Victoria when they first met. Ethan had been in the room not because Victoria needed backup, but because Jean would receive a stranger differently with someone he trusted present. And the meeting had been awkward in the honest way that meetings are when everyone in the room knows that damage was done, and nobody is entirely sure what the protocols are for moving past it. Jean had listened to what Victoria said. Then he'd asked 2 questions: whether the ownership of the space was clean and unconditional, and whether she expected anything in return. Victoria had answered yes to the first and no to the second. Jean had looked at her for a long moment with the measuring expression of a man who'd spent 4 decades assessing whether a part was what it was supposed to be. "All right," he'd said. "Not thank you. Not let's shake on it. Just all right," which in Jean Becker's vocabulary was a form of acceptance that carried as much weight as a contract. 7 of the original 9 workers came back. The other 2 had built other things in the intervening years that they weren't willing to leave, which Jean said was fine, which it was. The shop opened on a Tuesday in March with no ceremony because Jean didn't believe in ceremony, just opened the doors at 7 in the morning and started taking appointments, and by noon there were 6 cars in the bay and the radio was on and the smell of the place, oil and metal and the specific warmth of a working engine, was exactly what it had been and exactly what it was supposed to be. Ethan worked there. That was the other part, the part that had come together without anyone formally deciding it. Jean had offered, and Ethan had said yes in the same conversation where he'd quit the moving company and given his notice at the gas station, and neither of those conversations had been difficult in the way he'd expected because both his supervisors had been people who could read a situation. And the situation was that he'd found the thing he was supposed to be doing and it was somewhere else. He was good at the work. He'd always been good at it, in the way you're good at things you do because you care about them being done right, and coming back to it felt less like a return than like picking up a thread he'd set down in a hard moment and not thought he'd get back to. He came home at the end of each day with grease on his hands that took a few minutes to fully scrub out, and Lily would tell him about school, and they'd make dinner and the apartment. They'd found a better one, closer to the school, with a second bedroom and a kitchen that had actual counter space, would fill up with the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday. And Ethan would sit at the table after Lily went to bed and think about how for a long time he'd believed that ordinary was something that was happening to other people, something he was adjacent to but not inside of, and how strange and good it was to be simply inside of it. Victoria rebuilt Hale Dynamics slowly, which was the only way a thing like that can be rebuilt if it's going to hold. She kept her position as CEO. The board had tried, briefly, to use the chaos of the Marcus investigation as an argument for a leadership transition, and she had dismantled that argument in a 2-hour meeting that Selena Park had described afterward as the most effective piece of corporate theater she'd witnessed in 30 years, which Victoria had said was not what it was just being clear. And she used the position to restructure from the inside. The changes were not dramatic on the surface. The company didn't suddenly become something unrecognizable. What changed was the weight given to things that hadn't had weight before, how acquisitions evaluated the human cost of consolidation, how the board assessed the long-term value of worker stability, what metrics actually measured whether the company was doing what a company was supposed to do in the world it operated in. Small institutional changes that took months to implement and would take years to fully see the effects of. She talked to Ethan about it sometimes, not for validation. She'd stopped needing that particular thing from people somewhere in the months after the Meridian when she'd discovered that the decisions she made from her own compass held up better over time than the ones she made from the approval of the room. She talked to him because he asked questions that forced her to articulate things she hadn't put into words yet, and putting things into words was how she knew if they were real or just ideas she was carrying around. "What's the foundation actually for?" he asked her once, not confrontationally, just wanting to understand the honest answer. She thought about it for a moment. "The cases that fall between the systems," she said. "People who need something specific that the system doesn't have a category for. Medical expenses that aren't quite covered. Businesses that need a start that's not quite small enough for the small business programs and not quite big enough for the investment funds." She paused. "People like you were, 18 months ago." He looked at her. "I'm not saying that like it's about guilt," she said. "I'm saying it because you were the thing that taught me what the gap looked like. Someone who was doing everything right and still couldn't get to the thing that mattered most." She held his gaze. "That gap is real, and it exists in hundreds of places, and I have resources that can reach into some of them, so that's what the foundation is for." He nodded. Not enthusiastic, not performative, just a nod that meant he'd heard her and believed it was true. "You should be on the board," he said, "of the foundation." She looked at him. "I am on the board. I chair it." "I meant me," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved in the way it did when she was surprised and pleased and didn't want to be obvious about either. "You'd have to go to meetings. I go to things when they matter. It's a significant time commitment." "Victoria." "Yes," she said. "You should be on the board." The pier was Lily's idea. She brought it up in October, almost a year after the night Ethan had run its length in the rain toward a wheelchair moving too fast toward the edge. She'd heard the story, not all of it, the version appropriate for 8-year-olds, which was substantial because Lily's tolerance for softened versions of things had always been limited, and she'd decided with the completeness of a child deciding something that they should go back. "Why?" Ethan asked. "Because you started there," Lily said, with the precision of someone for whom this was self-evident. "And now you're here, and Victoria's here, and I think you should see it when it's not raining." He looked at her. "You think we should go look at a pier?" "I think you should stand on it and see what it looks like when it's fine," she said. "Because right now when you talk about it, you look like it was only a bad thing, and I don't think it was only a bad thing." He didn't say anything for a moment. "I think it was the thing," Lily said. She said it the way she said things she'd thought about, with the quiet certainty that was either inherited from him or had developed in response to having him as a father. He was never sure which. "So we should go see it." They went on a Saturday afternoon when the weather was mild and the bay was doing something gray-green and calm. Nothing like the night Ethan had been there alone with the rain coming sideways and the walls of the apartment pressing in. The pier was different in daylight, longer looking somehow, more ordinary. The old planks just old planks, and the railing just a railing, nothing in it of the charged, terrible specificity of that night. Lily walked the length of it with the deliberate attention of someone taking inventory, one hand trailing the railing, looking out at the water and then back at the city and then at her father. Victoria moved beside Ethan, the chair quiet on the planks, and the three of them went to the far end where the railing was still slightly bent from the night he'd hit it with his full weight, a detail that nobody had gotten around to repairing. He touched the bent iron. It was cold and slightly rough with old paint. "This is where it happened," Lily said, not a question. "Yeah." She looked at the bent railing, then at the water below, then at Victoria. "Were you scared?" "Very," Victoria said. "Were you scared?" Lily asked her father. "I didn't have time to be scared," he said. "Afterward I was." Lily considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. Then she looked at the water and said, "I'm glad you jumped." Ethan looked at his daughter standing at the end of the pier with her hair moving slightly in the bay wind, 8 years old and healthy in the specific way she hadn't been for most of her life, the procedure behind her and the future in front of her with a shape it hadn't had before, and he felt something that didn't have a clean name. Gratitude wasn't quite it. Relief wasn't quite it. Love was part of it, but love was always part of everything she was involved in. It was more like the recognition that a single moment, unplanned and unasked for, had moved everything that followed it, and that the things that followed it were good, and that he would not have chosen them, but could not now imagine the version of his life that hadn't included them. "Me too," he said. Victoria was looking at the water. The afternoon light did something particular to the bay at that hour, flattened it out, and made it look almost approachable. Nothing like the cold black thing it had been. She had her hands in her lap and her face was turned toward the horizon, and she looked, for the first time in all the months he'd known her, completely still. Not the controlled stillness of someone managing their presentation, but the natural stillness of someone who is exactly where they are and not somewhere else simultaneously. He thought about what she'd told him, once, in Danny's kitchen in the early morning, about patterns and what they meant. He'd said it felt like chance. Two people in the wrong place at the right time, nothing more than what night it was. He'd meant it when he said it. He still thought it was technically true, but there was another thing that was also true, which was that chance, when it arrived, required something of you. It required the decision to run instead of standing still, and the decision to open the door instead of saying it wasn't his problem, and the decision to stay when staying was complicated, and to trust when trust was not the safe choice, and to let someone help when letting someone help felt like losing something. Chance put the situation in front of you. What you did with it was still yours. He'd made a series of choices over the course of the last year that he hadn't planned and couldn't have predicted, and those choices had led here, to a bent railing on a municipal pier on a Saturday afternoon, standing beside a woman he trusted with the things that mattered most, watching his daughter look at the water with the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who had time now, who had years now, who could stand at the edge of things and look out without anyone needing to be afraid for her. That was the thing he kept coming back to, in the quiet moments. Not the drama of the Meridian, not the night on the pier, not the investigation or the surgery or the shop or any of the individual events that had marked the last 14 months, just the accumulated fact of where they'd arrived. Not perfect, not without the residue of hard things, not without the losses that didn't unhappen just because other things got better, but here, present, functional. His daughter running again. His hands back in the work they were meant for. Victoria, in the world as the person she was choosing to be, rather than the one circumstance had been trying to unmake. Here, on a pier, on a Saturday, in the ordinary afternoon. "We should get food," Lily said from ahead of them, already starting back down the pier with the forward momentum of someone who had seen what she came to see and was ready for what came next. "I want the noodles from the place with the red sign." "We've been here for 10 minutes, Ethan said. "I know, I'm hungry." Victoria looked at him, and there it was. That almost smile, the one that had been arriving more completely over the months, less guarded, more willing to be seen. "She's right," she said. "I could eat." He looked at the two of them. his daughter pulling ahead with her decisive 8-year-old stride, Victoria starting to follow, the bay behind them both going gray-green and calm. And something in him settled, not dramatically, not with any announcement, just the quiet internal shift of a person who has been braced for a long time standing down. He caught up with Lily. He matched his pace to Victoria's on his other side. The three of them walked the length of the pier back toward the city, toward the place with the red sign and the noodles, toward the rest of the Saturday, toward everything that came after. There's a version of this story that is about a rescue. A man sees someone in danger, acts without thinking, pulls her out of the water, and changes both their lives. That version is true, and it matters, but it leaves out the harder thing, the thing that is less dramatic and more real, which is that the rescue was only the beginning, and beginnings are the easy part. The hard part is what comes after. The adrenaline fades, and you're standing in a kitchen at 6 in the morning across from someone you don't know, and you have to decide whether to trust or to close, whether to see or to look away, whether to let the fact of what someone did wrong be the whole of who they are. The hard part is letting someone help you carry something you've been carrying alone because you've told yourself that needing help is a kind of failure, when it isn't. It never was. It's just what it looks like when people are in proximity to each other's lives in the way people are supposed to be. Ethan Cole had spent 4 years becoming very good at managing alone. He'd done it because he had to, because Lily needed him to function, and functioning meant keeping the walls up and the focus narrow, and the grief and guilt and exhaustion sorted into boxes that he didn't open during business hours. It had worked, in the way that things work when the only measure is whether you're still standing. But standing is not the same as living, and he'd known that somewhere under everything, and the night on the pier had cracked something open that he hadn't been able to reclose, and he'd stopped trying to at some point, and the open place had let things in. The difficult and the painful, and also the good. The deeply ordinary good. The kind that doesn't announce itself but just accumulates, until one day you're standing at the end of a pier in October watching your daughter demand noodles, and you realize you are inside your life rather than managing it from a distance. That's the story. Not the wheelchair and the water and the files and the ballroom, though all of those things happened and mattered. The story is two broken people choosing over and over, in small and ordinary moments, to be honest about what they needed and present with what they had and responsible for what they'd done, and finding that those choices, accumulated, added up to something neither of them could have built alone. It's not a clean story. Victoria still sits in board meetings and has to decide between the number and the person behind it, and she doesn't always get it right. Ethan still wakes up sometimes at 3 in the morning with Sandoval's name in his head and the particular weight of a decision he'll carry for the rest of his life. Lily still has checkups every 6 months and probably always will, and the possibility of her is still the thing that can stop Ethan cold in the middle of an ordinary moment if he lets himself think about it too directly. None of that is resolved. Some things don't resolve. They just get carried differently over time, by people who've learned to share the weight. On a pier in October, on a Saturday afternoon, a man and a woman and a little girl walked back toward the city in the mild bay light, none of them saying anything that mattered, all of them in exactly the right place. That was enough. That was the whole thing.